All right, everyone. If you take a look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4 today, better together. This is God's antidote for a lonely world. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. I don't know if you guys are like me in any way, but when I see all the different tragedies that happen in our world, a lot of the violence, a lot of the people who are left behind, lonely, crushed, struggling, and all the evil, especially in our digital world, it's so hard not to turn away, not to close our eyes because there's just so much. In our digital world, it just seems like it happened right next door. And it just kind of piles on, doesn't it? And it hurts too much to just keep looking at it because it's like every single thing that comes to us through our news feeds or whatever is happening in our neighborhood, and we have to, each and every one of us have to solve it and bear it, and that's just the pain. Now Solomon in chapter 3 dealt with the injustice in a world and dealt with evil. We talked about that last week, and in chapter 4 he's going to go down, look even more into the pain of that isolation, that loneliness. And he's going to talk about people who are crushed and oppressed in the first few verses. And he's going to look right into that pain. And he's not going to do what I did or what maybe some of you, if you're like me, do. And that is, he's not going to turn away from it because it's just too much. He's going to look into it until it becomes almost unbearable. And he's going to cry a lament. So the first few verses of this chapter are going to open up into a lament. Like there's just so much. What were we designed for? Are we really designed just for isolation, crushing by those who are in power and oppression? And throughout the chapter, you're going to see all of these hints about loneliness, isolation, suffering of people, especially the breakdown of community. This is very similar to the first family, like Adam and Eve, when Cain kills Abel and their whole family breaks down and then Cain has to leave. And now, Solomon, when he looks at this, he sees all of this through the lens of what people have done to others to make them abandoned and lonely and marginalized. But he also sees it through decisions that people make which drive them into loneliness and into isolation. Before we press on, before I go and show you the main points in chapter 4, it's so actual. Ecclesiastes 4 is so present for us right now because we have an epidemic of loneliness. I'll give you some things that I picked up, some stats that I compiled for y'all. It's right now, statistics say that nearly 1 in 6 people globally identify themselves as lonely. 1 in 6. They expect by 2050 for that number to drop down to maybe 1 in 4. Loneliness contributes to 100 deaths per hour worldwide. The health impact on us, everybody, when we come into loneliness and isolation is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So if you're already smoking 15, that's double damage, right? The loneliness is heavy. The economic impact in the United States, for example, the economic toll every year is $400 billion plus that are lost due to loneliness. In the UK, it's over $3 billion lost annually. It's 1.2% of the GDP of Spain. And in Italy, we're approaching 10 million people who deal or have identified with chronic loneliness. 10 million here in this country, and it's growing. It's fascinating that in the United States, the key demographic for the loneliness is young men between 18 and 30 years old. The key demographic in Italy is older women, and that just shows you this opposite side of the spectrum. Nearly half of American teens report being online, and they categorize themselves as online constantly. Children's times in the last 10 years have been cut in half by spending time with each other due to screen time. Basically, they're pouring their friendships onto cell phones and tablets. Weekly religious service attendance has fallen. Worship of the Lord has fallen from 42% to 30%, maybe once every 5 weeks for someone who calls himself a Christian to attend church just in the last 20 years. Marriage rates have plummeted and plunged. Public gatherings like third places, like Starbucks, coffee shops, pubs, other things are disappearing. For example, in Britain, pubs are closing at 1 per day, which is faster than the Nazi bombing closed them during World War II. South Korea, fertility rates are so low that you need to pass 20 people just to find somebody who is a grandmother or a grandfather. In Japan, over almost 2 million people a year withdraw and have no contact with people for over 6 months at a time just to deal with their loneliness. It was interesting in the United States, 3 out of 4 restaurant orders are eaten outside of a restaurant rather than in a restaurant. Declining participation has meant that people have gone from analog organization experiences to digital companion services online, calling that a true community. And so we have reduced productivity, we have higher healthcare costs. One of the things, as I was reading in one of the articles, is that some people who classify themselves as lonely or really suffering from that also are wide open, they found, are very tendential for conspiracy theories. One female author wrote, I'm going to try to quote her as best as I can remember, that loneliness and solitude are the fundamental or the foundations for the enactment of tyranny. Despots, dictators rise on the backs of lonely people. Today, friends, as we dive into Solomon's wisdom, we're going to face some challenges to look at ourselves. Solomon is going to confront us with the reality, a difficult reality, of societal breakdown and also our instincts toward our personal independence, like almost fostering, making our own loneliness, our independence, and our selfish natures. Selfishness. Now, the tendencies toward our independence and kind of being self-made people are very tempting, but in the end, they will lead us to emptiness and loneliness, which is very profound. Now, this message in chapter 4 is clear. Here's what Solomon is saying. We were created for community and for friendship. That's how you were designed. And so he urges us, reach out, love, give your money away, give your stuff away, care for others, serve one another. And in this call, we don't just find our purpose, but when we're doing it, we're also going to find the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ right among his people. So let's jump into the passage where we are. I'm going to give you the 3 sections that we're going to look at. And it's going to be based on solitary number 1, and then 2 people together, and 3, looking for 3 in our relationships. What do I mean by that? Let me show you. The first section that we'll look at is 3 things that destroy community, and then 3 Hevel communities. Hevel is the word vapor. We find it all over. I think it's mentioned some 38 times in Ecclesiastes. It's a word for able. It means something that's here, but it won't last. It's not something you can build your life on, okay? So it's vapor. It'll pass. So you're going to find 3 short-lived communities, not just false communities. They feel community-like, but they're pseudo-communities, if I can say it that way. And then we're going to find 3 are better than 1. This is God's plan for relationship, for friendship, for that connection that God has made and wired every single one of us that we all long for. We were wired toward people and toward God, okay? So let's start with that first one. 3 things that destroy community. And this is isolation. This is solitude. Here's his lament. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed. And they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, 3 times he mentions oppression about the one solitary person. On the side of their oppressors, there was the power. And there was no one to comfort them. And I thought it was so bad that I got to this lament. The dead who are already dead are more fortunate than the living who are still alive because of this. It's everywhere. But better than both is he who has not even yet been born and has not seen the evil deeds that are done among man. The work that men do toward each other. And then I saw that all toil and all skill, friends, this is just human efforts. This is what we put our activity to and our concentration on. It seems like, for Solomon, it seems like all of our efforts are coming from a man's envy of his neighbor. And this is vapor. He's doing a lot of work, but it vanishes. And this is shepherding the wind, like you can really control it, shepherding the direction of life. We'll stop there. We'll come back to some other verses. This is a pain that Solomon confronts. Jesus confronted the very same pain in his earthly ministry. There was a time when Jesus was during his ministry, when he comes across divine appointment, right? He comes across a man who is deaf and who is mute, unable to speak. And in chapter 7 of Mark, you can see this. Let me pull it up on the screen for you. In Mark 7 and verse 34, looking up to heaven, Jesus sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, which that means be opened. This is coming up. You can hear like the breath, the sighing in the word, be opened. It's an onomatopoeia, a word that sounds like how it's spelled and how it's written, okay? And the word sigh there means to groan, to agonize from within. What did Jesus encounter? He encountered his creation broken and twisted in this man who was marginalized and lonely from the outside with his body. He couldn't hear and he couldn't communicate. So of course he couldn't have relationships. A lonely, solitary man. When Jesus, he doesn't look away because it's too much to bear. He goes right up to him and he sighs the breath of life, just like at the breath of creation. When Jesus created our world, he breathes out and says, be opened. Like, let there be opening. And there was opening. Very next verse. He recreates this. Jesus used that word again, sighed, with that groaning, that agony, when he was encountering the Pharisees. The Pharisees were coming up and they had such hard hearts. Jesus groaned in his spirit because their spirits were closed. The Apostle Paul uses the very same word about our creation in Romans chapter 8. He says that the creation every day has a meaning, has a reason for why it was created, but it was subjected to futility, meaning it can't reach that meaning, and it groans to reach its purpose, its scope, and that is that we, the sons of God, the children of God, would bring creation into glory and fulfill our creation mandate into glory before God. So creation itself, our world is groaning to try to glorify God, if I can say it that way. That's inside. It groans under the curse. And Jesus groaned as he encountered that twisting, hardening by sin, inside or outside. And what does Jesus do? He groans, if you will, in agony on the cross. This is good news already. He gave his life and also his grace so that anyone who receives him will never be crushed by loneliness, never be abandoned by God to an eternal hell alone. That's one of the main things that makes hell hell, is that you are solitary alone. No matter how many people say, well, we're just going to party when we get there. They don't understand that it is a place of nonstop consuming each other and being isolated. Now, Solomon, when you come back to chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes, he struggles with that word oppression. So here are the 3 community destroyers that I was talking about. Number 1, oppressions through envy. This is his groaning now, okay? We're going to come back into this. And then another one we're going to get to in verse 5, we haven't read this yet, is laziness. And verses 5 and 6, verses 7 and 8 deal with manic busyness. Okay, so let's dig into these a little bit. If you notice, like I mentioned, he mentions oppressions 3 times in the first verse. What did he see? He says there's no one to comfort them because it's coming, the oppression and the loneliness or the isolation for these people. They are poor, they're marginalized, and somebody is playing God in their life and is stealing from them. It's a community of the powerful. So those who were rulers, who were supposed to use God's wisdom to build the community in relationship, how God made our world, healthy societies, what did they do? They wanted power and control, and you can see the proof, the evidence, that they were not walking wisely before God, and any country, any administration, any people in authority who do not practice the wisdom of God, you will see it in societal breakdown and injustice and rampant loneliness. As people get individualized, atomized, separated from society. And so where did it come from? One of the main things that it came from, as he said in verse 4, if we can look at that again, it came from man's envy of his neighbor. Man's envy of his neighbor. Why were people just saying, I got to work harder, I have to keep up? When we think of the word envy, we think, oh, if I could only have, I wish I could be like them, as beautiful, as handsome, as good looking as they are. I wish I had the talents that they had. I wish I had the upgraded car that they had. I wish I had the stripes or the leaves or birds on my shoulder that they have. I wish there was something, and that is baseline envy. But envy is one of the 7 deadly sins, and the reason is one of the 7 deadly sins is because it's more subtle in our life. I'm going to give you a quote that I found about envy, and just let these words, let's just chew on these words and see how often it comes up in our own hearts. Deep in our hearts, we want to be noticed, and we want to be the focus of attention. And that desire is capable of driving or fueling all we do and the reason we do it. Now, Jesus says that I am to love you. But what I often feel is, what will it take to get what you have? If I envy you through loving you because I love you only to get something from you, then not only am I engaged in oppressing you, I have a cancer that eats at my heart and can destroy me even as I destroy you. This is because I have dressed up selfishness inside of generosity, and I've deceived the both of us in the process. Envy auto-consumes, self-consumes you and the other person you are envying. It is very deadly. Envy makes us happy when we drag other people down and take something from them in the process. Solomon says, I see it everywhere. He's unpacking this desire, this drive that's in us. Why? Because envy is a thing of, I'm going to take life from you. But envy eats the soul. I'm going to take something of life from you, but actually what I'm doing is I'm taking life from myself. And often we don't dig deep enough. We don't get under. We don't let the Lord illuminate, in those quiet parts. And where's the fruit? Where can we find it? When our desire is capable of driving all that we do in that focus of attention to have what you want. or what they have, or, yeah. In verse 5, he mentions laziness. This is another way that destroys community. So first, envy does it. Verse 5, he says, here's the other relationship destroyer. It's one who's a fool. He's fool because he's arrogant in his own mind, but he crosses his arms. This is the idea. He folds his hands, and when he does it, he cannibalizes himself. He doesn't realize that he's eating himself. He's a self-made man. That's what the picture is. He's a self-made man, and he says, I've done enough. I'm living good. I'm living the dream. I've made it enough so that I'm good, and I don't need other people. Let's just use the practical illustration that Solomon uses here. What's the posture of your hands if your arms are folded? Closed. And if you're going to have relationships and friendships that thrive and to flourish, what needs to be the posture of your hands? Can you show me? Thank you. Giving. Only the fool in his pride says, I don't need anybody. And what Solomon says is he's eating his own self from inside. Just like envy, you're just working harder in unhealthy competition. It's driving you, and it's eating you and the other person alive. Then you eat yourself alive when you say, I don't need anybody else. If you have your hands closed like this in life, then there is nothing that you can give. It's a form of hate. Because God's given you so many things, and he wants you to serve others, and he wants you to flourish, and he's designed you for human community and relationships and love and service. And if you have your arms like this, you won't give anybody anything. But what you're doing is you're consuming who you actually are from the inside. The third one is manic busyness. Let's take a look at verse 6 to 8. Another community destroyer. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. What is he saying there? There is that manic busyness. You're working all your human efforts. Your schedule, it doesn't matter if it's just for your job, but it's everything. You fill up because you're like, I have to stay busy. I have to accumulate. I have to get ahead. So you fill your hands with work and your own human efforts. But he says, better is serenissima, because that's the word quietness right there. It's a little self-promotion here. I'm happy about that. It is shalom. It is peace. It is not solitude that leads you to agony, but it is that on one hand you do your human efforts, but you have a life balance where on the other hand it's free to be able to give what you're receiving and accumulating. If all you're doing is filling up your life with work and human effort to accumulate, you're just pulling, grabbing, grasping. Does that make sense? And this is no, I do have work that God's called me to do, but I also have an open hand and enough time to be able to give to others. Manic busyness doesn't have time for relationships. It always plans for tomorrow, and when tomorrow arrives, it leaves us lonelier with more stuff to manage. So our hands are full. Look at verse 7 and 8. Again, I saw the vapor that's in this world. One person who has no other, either a son or brother. It sounds like Adam when Cain kills Abel and then Cain goes away too. Yet, there is no end to all of his toil, all of his human efforts, and his eyes are never satisfied with the riches that he's gained. And he will never ask himself, who am I doing all this for? And why am I depriving myself of pleasure? Isn't that ironic? He's working for pleasure so hard, but yet he doesn't understand that he's actually depriving himself of pleasure because he's eating his soul. This is also vapor, and I was looking through different translations. This is a very sad way to live. That's the best way to connotate this. This is a miserable job in human effort to live like this. G.K. Chesterton wrote, he says about contentedness, hey, guys, there are two ways to get enough. One is to accumulate more and more, and the other is just to desire less. Solomon, as he looks at this, it says, listen, some of these things are done to you that break down relationships, that don't let you arrive at the purpose that God's designed for you. And others are things of man's own choosing. And our discontentedness and our avarice, our greed, our envy drives us so that we end up with a picture of here's the vapor. Here's what life looks like at the end. This author writes, so here he is. He is wealthy, but not healthy. He is alone and lonely. He is possessing everything except enjoyment. In fact, nothing tastes good anymore. And if you're living in Italy and nothing tastes good anymore, man, that's bad. Therefore, to be unhappy at home in your life when all is said and done and you're sitting there is the ultimate result of all ambition. And he's regarding selfish drive and ambition. Manic busyness leads you to look like this. So 3 things. Oppression that comes through envy. It eats at us like a cancer. The second one is a proud laziness that says, I don't need others and I don't need to give to others. And the third one is, I don't have time. They're not worth it. And that comes in our manic busyness. That drives this epidemic of loneliness. But there is an answer. But when he comes to the end of the chapter, he's going to pick up this theme again. So it's like 2 parentheses, the first part of the chapter and the third part. So we're going to jump to that because he talks about the other communities that are pseudo-communities. They're like vapor. Take a look at verse 13. These are the 3 Hevel communities. They seem like this. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. Now, it seems like in all the studies and commentaries, there are 3 kings that he's referring to, each one in a line. Okay? And out of the 3 kings, each one of them in their rulership seems to be able to have everything of community around them, but it doesn't last, and it's in a way they die alone. Okay? So there are 3 different people he's talking about here. Some wonder if it's the stages of the story of the life of Joseph, okay, because he talks about prison and coming up from prison. Others wonder if it's the life of Saul, David, and now Solomon, if he's referencing himself even at the end. So just take a look at this. It's a little bit difficult passage to translate and to interpret, but all he's doing is giving us an illustration where many times we think we have true communities, but really they're fake communities. It's not real relationships, even though it feels like it at first. Okay, let's just go there. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. Why? Because he had no more community around him. The older he got, the less counselors he had. He was the only one making his own decisions for himself. And if you will notice in life, the older that we get, we often do shed friendships because we don't want to put in the effort to make new ones. It takes a long time sometimes to serve others. For this younger one, this poor youth, went from prison up to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor. Okay? Sounds like David, almost like his father. So he has a kingdom, he was poor, and he takes the throne, and yet it's still, what happens? The kingdom passes. Who's he going to give it to? Verse 15. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, all the people running to and fro, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. So they were running as if he's like, look at all these people that I have, but yet they're ignoring him. He's really lonely at the top. And if you often hear people who are in leadership, they will often say how lonely it is. And then this other one, there was no end to all the people of whom this king led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. That sounds like Solomon at the end of his life. This also is vapor and a striving after the wind. So don't try to find the relationships that God has wanted for you in these three communities. For example, let me give you the three. You won't find true community in climbing the ladder of power in politics. Politics seems to give you a brotherhood or something, a connection, and a thinking of the same way, but it is not the depth of it cannot provide the depths of relationships that God wants to give to you. Ladder of power is used for wisdom and governing, not for community and relationships in that way. Number two, you won't find community, you won't find relationships in winning the approval of the crowd. Everybody's going to either approve of you, or you can't find it through celebrity. You can't find it through being an influencer. You can't have true relationships by counting friends on Facebook for all the kids, all the Instagrammers and TikTok, okay? It's not there. That's a pseudo community because it doesn't serve, it only seeks. And then the third one is you can't find community, and you won't find it in a pseudo community when you're trying to build a lasting legacy or fame. That will be vapor as well, because you can't control your legacy. You see, you can't rule, you can't work. And so we go wrong, we go after the wind in trying to build a lasting legacy or fame. Only Jesus' name is going to be remembered for many of us. You can't find significance in these. Modern celebrity culture, social media fame, political divisiveness, approval ratings, status, public recognition. But you can find it through service motivated by an eternal reason. Let me go back to the third section. So that was the last section, and it reflects and looks like the first. But right in the middle, in verses 9 to 12, it's the only place in the chapter where Solomon doesn't use the word hevel. There's no vapor. And then he puts a beautiful phrase, there's a key phrase right in the middle of it. And when he does that, he's saying, it's almost like on both sides, he's saying, look at the oppressed and look at the fame seekers. Pseudo-communities and isolation. Everyone's lonely and destroyed. Right in the middle, I want to show you just a glimpse of what the relationships are that we're all aching for and how God's designed them. Take a look at verse 9 with me. Let me pull it up on the screen for us. 2 are better than 1. So we've talked about the times where 1, if you're alone, that's not good. Solomon turns and says, okay, there's benefit. There's benefit to friendship. It's natural. There's benefit to good relationships. Here's some of the benefits. Because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. I know that's a nice old English word, but fellow there means devoted friend. A devoted friend is going to be there to lift you up in good times and bad times, aren't they? That's how you know, by the way, if they're a devoted friend, especially when you're experiencing bad times. But woe to him, like Adam and like Solomon, who is alone when he falls, or like Abel in the field, and no one, there is not another brother or devoted friend to lift him up. Verse 11, again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. How can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. There's our beautiful phrase that turns everything on this chapter and echoes throughout the Bible. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 18, God said, "It is not good for man to be" what? Alone. Amen, wives? Oh, not a word. Come on, girls. But from us men, we're all saying amen. We're grateful for you. It is not good. But in the idea of alone, he starts with community by bringing a wife, and then a family, and then society. He starts community right there. It is not good for you to be alone from any community. You weren't made that way. And if you're an isolated workaholic, filling up your life, you are actually fighting against how God made you to flourish. Why? Because the image that God puts down upon you and in you is the triune God, the three, if I can say it that way. It is an image of relationship and mutual support. Now, in Proverbs 11, Solomon wrote in Proverbs 11 and 15, and he basically emphasizes that for friendship, two are better than one because you need to seek advice and avoid loneliness and isolation. But Ecclesiastes, Solomon gets older and he writes this. Here he says, being together with others is absolutely essential for your existence. It's not just about, hey, get a group around you so you make good war plans, so you have good air battle management, all right? So you need intel, recon, etc. No, it's more than that. You need it for your fundamental existence so that you can flourish. That's how God made it. None of this was part of God's design. He made us to be relational beings. And notice how he orchestrated all the families that we were supposed to be in. We didn't choose our parents. We don't choose our kids. Sometimes we've asked God, why couldn't we? But we don't choose them. And we don't choose often who he puts us with in life at the same time. He organizes even our friendships. Why? Because all of that reflects that God is triune. Think about it. God is all the time, simultaneously, because he's not in time, constantly reflecting and investing love in the other person, in the Trinity. Father to Son, Son to Spirit, Spirit to Father, and back and forth, all over, all the time. He is love. And that image is coming down and orchestrating all of our relationships in this world and life. There is a three involved, right? The number three for the Hebrews was the divine number. It's a picture of the Trinity. So when Solomon writes about a threefold cord, he is casting this image that God is very involved in our relationships, and he's the one that provides them, and he's the one that strengthens them. Autonomy and self-sufficiency fights that image. The more that we're like, I'm on my own, we're fighting what God is pouring down. Those are false gospels, everybody. They don't lead you to good news. And they're wrong. Why? Because they say, as long as you love yourself, you don't need to love others. And in the end, they will ultimately lead you to eat your own soul and end a life in meaninglessness. Ecclesiastes here in this chapter, in verse 5, says, you'll eat yourself. You'll cannibalize yourself. That's what happens when we follow the false gospels of autonomy and self-sufficiency. There's no Christian who can say, I can do this alone. Because a Christian is defined by community. I am a Christian in community. That's all hyphenated. That's my title. I'm a son of God in community. Hyphens all in between. That's the whole title. I'm not a Christian outside of a community. If a person calls themselves a Christian, but they say at the same time they don't need community, they don't understand the word Christian to begin with. Because God saves us from independence, being alone, into codependence with each other in God's family with Christ Jesus. Well, let me illustrate this. If today I marked my status as single on Facebook, some of you would be alarmed, especially her. Why? Because I can't claim to be a loyal husband, and I can't claim to be a responsible father for my family, and also in public proclaim I am also single and available at the very same time. They don't go together. And that's the same thing for a Christian who is married to Christ. If you are married to Christ, your status is occupied in a relationship. And the relationship is with Him, the head, and us, the body, the bride. That's what He calls us into. The divine Lord sends His Son, who becomes our friend, lays down His life and draws us into community, into marriage with Him. Now, in the verses that we read, 10 through 12, two are better than one. So this is natural goodness in our friendships. You get mutual help. That part about, being warm together. How can one stay warm? Two are better than one. That's a metaphor for encouragement and strengthening there. You get mutual comfort. That's the warmth of a friendship. And then also mutual protection. Because two can withstand a violent attack. Will do. There's so many natural and good benefits, and we can go more into that, but we just don't have time. But the problem in our hearts is that, if I can bring it home here, we need more than that. We need someone who can do more than that. We need someone who can do more than help, more than comfort, and more than protect us. They can do all of that, but we need someone who can be an ultimate friend and redeem the agony of our hearts and make all of our relationships new in everything. That can make my relationship new with God and make my relationships new with anyone walking on this earth. I want you to see again that phrase, verse 12, threefold cord is not easily broken. In other words, we can phrase it this way. What Solomon is saying here, 3 are better than 2, which are better than 1. If 1 is bad, 2 are better than 1, you get friendship. But what you're really looking for is 3, the threefold cord. And Solomon is basically saying, in our relationships, we should really be looking for the divine orchestration, God in the mist, in the vapors of the relationships that we're experiencing. We should be looking to surrender those before the Lord. In every relationship that you have, you need Christ. Otherwise, it'll vanish like vapor. It won't last into eternity. God gives us Christian and Christ-centered relationships because those are the ones that are going to last forever. So turn to each other and smile, because you better get used to each other, right? And so, to make a relationship last for eternity, it needs more strength than any one of us can provide. It needs divine strength. If Christ isn't in your relationship, sooner or later, you will lean on the other person and you will want them to be God for you because He's not there. You're not looking for the third, the threefold cord. You're not looking for His work and His divine work in you. In other words, if I can say it this way, there's in your relationships and friendships that we're running and seeking and trying to invest in, or we long for those deep relationships, if we don't long for Christ first, there's not enough glue to hold those relationships together even through death. And God is, we just saw last chapter, God has put eternity into our hearts. We're longing for relationships that will last forever. And this simply means, friends, that you need a right relationship with God that is fervent, glorious, and good. Jesus said it this way, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. There it is. How do you have the relationships that I want to give to you that flourish into eternity? You love like I have. Okay, everybody got that? Next verse. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his, everybody? Friends. And Jesus says in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. Tim Keller on this verse said, this is not about earning God's friendship. This is rather the proof of intimacy with God in obedience. Why? Because what is the command? Love one another. And watch how I loved you. I gave my life away. And when I gave my life away and you received me, you and I, we became friends. Jesus is the supreme friend, the ultimate friend. Jesus came a long way through the incarnation and through the cross. And when we turn and love him in right relationship, when he dwells in us and we worship him and we continue our walk with him, then we are approaching him and we're together vulnerable. Jesus made himself vulnerable on the cross, taking away everything that would break our relationship and separate us from him. All the enmity that we have with God, he came and gave his life away as our friend. That's what our hearts are longing for. We want someone to do for us what we can't do for ourselves. We want a relationship that is ultimately and eternally fulfilling and rewarding, and only Jesus can provide that, and he already has. And he's brought it through the cross, and he said, this is my proof for how you can be made my friend. And when we come into him and he comes into us, together we are completely vulnerable. And now take that in and build. Imagine how, if you took that into every one of your relationships and you built every relationship off of the presence of Christ and in conformity to how he gave his life for you and made you and called you his friend. Imagine investing that kind of friendship, glorious, eternal, supreme, into every relationship that you have. That is putting the divine and making a threefold cord that lasts into eternity. That's what Christians do when they are first in a right relationship with Jesus. You need God in your relationship in your world, or all your other relationships will disappear, and your heart will be left in agony, and you will eat your own soul. Love God, love others, share what you have, enjoy grace, give yourself away, because that's how we were designed. And may God show the world through the church, this is what it's about, because of Jesus Christ.